Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good morning, good morning. My name is Leole Twalo. Welcome to our session this morning. And guess what we are talking about? Kicking out in starting with Africa Free Continental Trade Area. Good morning again. My name is Leole Twalo. A special welcome to all of you. We are talking about Africa. We are talking about where Africa is heading up to in terms of AfCFTA, and everyone's keep on asking what AfCFTA is all about. We are continuing with our conversations, our coaching circles with Africa Women in Supply Chain Association, as we now ensure that everyone in supply chain, everyone in Africa get to understand what is happening around Africa. How do we really get to grow our country? How do we really ensure that for all the countries that we have in Africa, we get to grow, we industrialize, and we beneficiate in terms of ensuring that also we reduce our dependencies. So it's a very exciting morning for me because this is a topic that I really love a lot because we want to see Africa growing. So today, this morning, I am joined by Sham Etienne, and ladies and gentlemen, we are live streaming both on Zoom, on LinkedIn, and on Facebook. Please, when you're out there, please make sure that whatever questions that you have pertaining to AfCFTA, you can put them on the chat box. A special welcome to yourself, and I will be checking all those questions. My question to you is, do you know what AfCFTA is all about? What impact it does have in Africa? Are you looking forward to the implementation? Because this morning we're discussing how do we really kick-start it. I think most of you would have picked up that a lot of work is happening on the background. So the question is, what is it? What is happening? So the person that I have this morning, very passionate about Africa, guys, and I'm not going to tell you what he does. Mr. Sham Etienne Bama. Sham, just show your pretty face out there. Sham is really, he is traveling this morning, by the way, and with his traveling, he's at the airport, but he said, Leo, I cannot miss this session because I really want to share the work that we are doing in Africa. I want to really share what is happening with Africa Free Continental Trade Area, because for all of us in Africa, it's going to take us in terms of our capacity, in terms of our capabilities to grow Africa as a whole. And that is why we are here. So Cham, please just join me this morning. If you can just show your face, introduce yourself, and I really want you to tell everyone what you do, because this is a very important topic in terms of trading, in terms of how we grow Africa. What does it really mean for us in Africa? And I really want to hear your perspective. Sham, if you can just join me, if you can show your face, then we can proceed. So everyone that is joining online, please just tell me what questions have you got in with regard to the topic that we have this morning, because guys, it's beyond the scope. I mean, the scope that we have in Africa is beyond where we are at. I think we know, firstly, that just to give you a bit of a background, Africa as a whole has got a lot of resources, and we have been exposed previously. And let me tell you about the exposure. The exposure is that with the resources that we have, we do not beneficiate. So our dependencies in terms of the final products, it's sitting in China, it's sitting in Europe. We export a lot of raw materials. We export a lot of commodities outside Africa. So my question to you, you are a buyer out there, you are a logistics person out there, you are a business person out there. What does it really mean to you? Because if you look at the economic sectors, something needs to be done. Something needs to be done. We're talking about industrialization, and that industrialization will come with utilizing the resources that we have in Africa. So I want you, if you have questions there, please put them on the chat box. I will be taking as many questions as I can. And a good thing is that my role this morning is just really to ask the questions. So Sham is the expert in this topic, and I would really want us to kickstart. Sham, are you there?
Yeah, thank you, my sister Lebo. Let me put on my video.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, apologies. I'm actually on transit, as you earlier highlighted. But that doesn't stop us from working because we have to pull the continent forward. So I am Cham Etienne Bama. I'm a trade policy expert with well over 12 years experience working with the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa on certain projects. I've worked with the ITC, International Trade Center in Geneva, on trade and gender issues. My permanent role is back in Cameroon, where I work as Deputy Director for International Trade Promotion at the Cameroon National Express Council. I equally handle trade issues with the Commonwealth, where we recently participated at the Commonwealth Heads of State and Government Summit in Rwanda. So now this webinar is coming at a moment where a lot has developed in Accra. I was following the outcome of the ministerial meeting that's currently going on in Accra, in Ghana. I think we have had a breakthrough. We have had a breakthrough in terms of the implementation of the AfCFTA. I can tell you, Lebo, as of now, you can actually go to the borders and your goods move across the borders under the African Continental Free Trade Area. And that is possible since yesterday. The electronic tariff book has been made available. If you go, I think I will share the link here, the portal, where you can actually easily put in the name of your country where you're exporting your good to and the country which is importing your goods. And then you go for search, you put the goods and you go for search, and it will be able to give you the possibility for you to move these goods on zero tariff within the continent. You have the most favored nation giving you zero tariff, because I actually did a simulation this morning on sunwoods from Cameroon to Seychelles. And it told me that I can actually export this wood under the most favored nation principle, duty-free, without paying a single franc in terms of custom duties. This is under the MFN. What about the African Continental Free Trade Area? Because it is important to tell participants this morning that it is not only the African Continental Free Trade Area that gives you the possibility to trade on the continent on zero tariff. Remember, most of African countries are members of the World Trade Organization, and under the most favored principle, we have tariffs that are actually on zero rate. And again, on the continent, there are countries that have signed bilateral free trade agreements where they can trade on zero tariff. And again, we have the regional economic communities and custom unions, some of them who are actually trading now on the zero tariffs. So these are some of the opportunities that we must understand. So the possibility now for you to trade is to look at which rule of origin is favorable for your goods. Because, Lebo, it is important to look at rules of origin under the various trade regimes that are available on the continent. For example, we have the tripartite free trade area between COMESA, EEC, and SADC that is unfolding. The rules of origin under this trade regime might be more favorable than those under the African Continental Free Trade Area, which is not what we wish. Because equally, when you look at the rules of origin under the same portal that was put on to public yesterday, they are giving us very flexible rules of origin that allow for accumulation rules of origin, picking goods across the continent and assembling them to give a final product that is eligible under African Continental Free Trade Area. So all these issues, which are very technical, and you must be initiated into trade policy to have a better understanding of what they imply, favored intra-African trade. And I can assure you, when you look at research that's been published by the African Trade Policy Center of the United Nations in Addis Ababa, there are prospects that within the next 10 years, we will be able to raise our trade to a significant 54% from the current 18 or 19% that we are trading among ourselves. And again, yesterday, the development that we received from Accra is that the African Development Bank has signed a huge check of millions of dollars to support the process. This comes to join other development partners on the continent, like AfriExim Bank, which has been doing a tremendous work in supporting the AfCFTA process. We are aware that the Pan-African Payment and Settlement System which is a platform that has been put in place by the African Exim Bank to be able to eliminate the recruit to a third party currency like the dollar, the euro, or the pounds to be able to trade among ourselves. With the PAPs,
I want to pack it there because it is a very interesting input that you are providing, Sham. And I want to take a step further, well, a step backwards. One of the things that you have just indicated, we have a lot of legislative instruments from the regional perspective.
yes.
Like the EAC, COMESA, the tripartite free trade agreement, and then we also have the African Continental Free Trade, and there's all these other bilateral road transport agreements across Africa as well. Don't you think that there's a bit of a a lot of a confusion in the industry? And I can touch on some of the areas like the SACU and MOU that consist of South Africa, Eswatini, Botswana, and Lesotho, that really looking at facilitation, but more on the road transport perspective. So my question is, looking at these legislative instruments from the regional perspective, do you think they create conflict? I know they're supposed to be merging. All of these are not supposed to be done in isolation. I think that's the first question to me. And because also I always get a lot of those questions when I talk about my person on active, like, oh, label, we've heard a lot around that. That is the first one. But also the second thing is also from the country's perspective. Looking at Africa, we have South Africa on its own. We have the SADC with few countries around it. If you look at East Africa, we look at Nigeria as well. There's certain rules and certain things that they put in place to ensure that facilitation happens around that. So I want you to touch a bit around that, because anyone that is listening, asking themselves, what has really changed? Where are all of these legislative instruments meet in the context of taking Africa forward?
Yeah, thank you very much, Lebo. That's a critical point you're touching there. On your first question, it is very important. We have to be honest to ourselves. This regionalism on the continent and at a certain level, stop regionalism, because you talked about SACU, which is a custom union. You talked about SADC, which is a recognized regional economic community by the African Union, brings in what we call the spaghetti bowl effect on the continent. When you look at SACU, South Africa is a member of SACU. South Africa is a member of SADC. You look at these two regional groupings, they have conflicting and complementary regulatory frameworks. But the AfCFTA now comes as an umbrella instrument, which builds on the existing initiative. When you look at the AfCFTA agreement, it says the regional economic communities are the building blocks of the African Continental Free Trade Area. The AfCFTA does not come from nowhere. It comes from instruments that exist on the continent, notably the Abuja Treaty. The Abuja Treaty is the foundation of the regional economic communities. It actually presented a time frame in which Africa is supposed to form regional economic communities at each geographical region. Now they come together, they collapse tariffs, they connect themselves to road network, and then now they create a unique legislative framework for trade, investment, intellectual property, and they can go beyond as the one. And that's why you're having custom unions. Remember, SACU is the oldest custom union in the history of humanity, since 1910 that we have SACU. But it was not created for the interest of Africa, for regional integration. It was created to facilitate the colonial master's interest, because he saw the smaller countries and said, okay, how are we going to trade with these smaller countries which are landlocked? So now we will use South Africa, which is still part of our country, to be able to integrate them. But today it is serving the interests of the continent and serving as a benchmark for other regional economic communities. So it is a problem, and at the same time, it is a solution. It is a problem because when one country belongs to different regional economic communities, I'll take the latest example of DR Congo, which has just joined the EAC. DR Congo is a member of the EAC, it's a member of SADC, it's a member of COMESA, it's a member of ECAS. These four regional economic communities are having different legislation in different domains. When you look at, for example, at the level of COMESA, they have a competition policy, which is applicable for all COMESA member states. In ECAS, we don't have. And likely, when you look at SADC, they are having one. These legislations are not the same. You tend to ask yourself, how is GRC going to survive in this spaghetti bowl effect of different legislations? The African Continental Free Trade Area comes now with an umbrella competition policy, which covers the entire continent, and which says any conflicting disposition between the AfCFTA and the regional economic community, that of the AfCFTA will prevail to the extent in order to resolve the problem at hand. So now this implies that the other regional economic communities are supposed to align their community regulatory framework with that of the AfCFTA, because if they maintain it, in case of a conflict, that of the AfCFTA will prevail. So for their interests, they have to align. But remember, the AfCFTA is building on existing regulations before they form a draft. The AfCFTA goes around and benchmark on best practices in all the regional economic communities and now form a legal corpus. So we don't copy the AfCFTA out of Africa. It builds on best practices on the continent, which now facilitate implementation. It takes what has already been applicable on the continent and builds on it. So in a nutshell, the AfCFTA is what we already have on the ground, which is working well, that we want other regions of the continent to copy from us. And you equally talked about, in your second question, you talked about national regulatory frameworks. Lebo, I want to say here that the AfCFTA is a member-driven agreement. Various countries have come and given in their sovereignty at the continental level that we want to give this legislative power at the continental level. At the national level, we don't want to work again on this. For example, for trade in goods, we are handing over our sovereignty to the AfCFTA Secretariat in Accra, which will now be legislating and supervising what we are implementing. That's why there is a dispute settlement mechanism that is already existing in Accra. And now we are looking for judges who will sit there, that member countries will send, who will sit there and be able to arbitrate on issues that will be brought to them. So this is giving us sovereignty. Countries cannot give us sovereignty and withhold it. And that is why we emphasize and always tell them that when you sign onto an agreement at the continental level, there are new things that come in. Yes, you need to review your domestic processes, align them with your new international commitment so that the benefits are immediately felt by the private sector. You cannot sign an agreement in 2022 and come and sit down with an old legislation of 1980. No, this period is a significant period. 42 years is a significant period. That is why you need to review your institutional architecture in the country. For example, in the case of Cameroon, which is my country, we don't have an export promotion agency. When we signed on to the AfCFTA, there is need for the government, and that was echoed during the consultative process with the private sector. The government is supposed to put in place an export promotion agency, which will now be carrying the private sector to other African countries, who will now be doing the research for the private sector, which will now be doing the market access for the private sector, which will now be carrying women and youth to trade fairs in Johannesburg, in Nairobi, in Harare, to be able to give them opening into this international market.
I want us to, because we're going to discuss that in terms of the opportunities. But those that have just joined us, we're talking about AfCFTA, and I love this conversation because it clearly shows that we're not budging, we're not going back. We are building the Africa that we want. And what Tom is really articulating quite well, that AfCFTA is not a mistake. What we want to grow as a country is really around regional integration. I think we know already that when AfCFTA was put together, we always knew that that whole regional integration was inevitable, and we needed economic transformation, and we needed sustainability as well in terms of socio-economic development when it comes to Africa. We know that we have to focus on poverty, employment as well, industrialization. And we know that as Africa, we have to start aggregating all our smaller countries into a large market to be able to deliver that economy of scale. Because at this point in time, our competitiveness is very, very limited. And if we start thinking around foreign direct investment, we want to encourage that. So that is exactly what we are discussing this morning. So if you have some questions out there to Sham, please just put them on the chat box, because there's a very interesting topic that really speaks to yourself as industry out there, as a supply chain professional, if you're in logistics as well as a business person. This is a very important concept, because all of us has got resources. We've got capabilities, the skills. How are we going to push towards this economic transformation in Africa? How do we move towards having an Africa that is not fragmented, and really focusing on our resources, focusing on our rich commodities as well, and ensuring that our dependencies is not outside Africa, it's inside Africa. That is why AfCFTA was created. So, I mean, I want to now touch on that element in terms of the opportunities, Sean. And anyone that wants to ask questions, guys, please put questions on the chat box. As you can see that I've got someone that is fully passionate about the growth of Africa, and he's fully involved from the trade policy perspective. He's fully involved in ensuring that AfCFTA becomes a success as well, and really spreading the word out there and being the advocate for Africa outside Africa as well, in other countries. So Sham, we can continue with our conversation. Let's talk about those opportunities. And I also want us to touch around the challenges, because we're talking about kickstarting, and I think you have really given us the gist of really what AfCFTA is about and what we want to really achieve. Now let's look at the biggest opportunities that comes with AfCFTA. Will we be able to achieve that? Because I mean, you were just talking about regional integration. We're talking about economic transformation. And earlier when I introduced, I said that we want to beneficiate, we want to industrialize. And the beneficiaries to that has to be Africa. So let's talk about opportunities that comes with that. How do we really achieve that? Where are the opportunities? And sometimes opportunities is not really about saying that I am going to make money out of it. It's opportunities also in terms of the transformation, but also I want us to bring the element of opportunities in terms of the youth, in terms of the women. That's one of my passions, by the way. If you can just touch on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Lebo. Once more, I always like to say Lebo is my sister from South Africa, because the energy in you it triggers another energy in other Africans across our continent. Lebo, we must understand that the AfCFTA is doing everything possible to be inclusive, to leave no one behind. Yes. Because the trick in it is that if somebody is left behind, that is definitely the collapse of the most outstanding project of the African Union since its creation. Remember, the African Continental Free Trade Area is not just a classic free trade agreement that covers trade in goods. It's an agreement, it's a deeper trade agreement, as we call it in technical terminology, because it covers trade in goods, trade in services. It looks at investment, it looks at competition policy, and now we are moving to touch on gender issues and inclusivity. So when an agreement covers basically all that goes with trade, touching into e-commerce, competition policy at a wider scale, 55 countries, then it seeks to give anyone the fair share that that country desires on the AfCFTA. So you've talked about inclusivity, women and the youth. I must tell you, consultations are still ongoing to be able to gather the challenges that women and youth are facing in trading across the borders. I have been fortunate to participate in some of this, and I can tell you non-tariff barriers, unregulated payments across our borders are a serious hindrance to the opportunities that are found in the African continental free trade area. But then we are also fortunate to have partners. I must hail our partners here, beginning with the UNDP, which has allocated a huge envelope to be able to support this process. We have GIZ, we have the European Union, we have the Afri-Exim Bank, the African Development Bank, we have IUDA, NEPAD. These agencies are all coming in, taking each component of the process to support the entire continent, to be able to generate the benefits that are expected from the African continental free trade area. I want to take one point, which His Excellency, the Secretary General of the AfCFTA has been emphasizing on. That is, we are dismantling tariffs. What about the non-tariff barriers? What about connectivity, logistics and transport, connectivity on the continent? He is very keen to that. And that is why he signed a memorandum of understanding with Trademark East Africa, which is envisaged to become Trademark Africa, which has done a tremendous job in East Africa community, as well as COMESA and SADC, in connecting the continent through the one-stop border post notion that is being generalized on the continent today. Remember, Lebo, before 10 years on the continent, when we are crossing our terrestrial borders, for example, leaving South Africa to Zimbabwe, you will arrive at the border. You will check through the South African immigration officers, the custom officers at the border, the SPS officers, the medical doctor, and then you will move a distance. You will now meet the Zimbabwean border officials, maybe 2 or 3 kilometers. But since 10 or 15 years, that is not more the case. When you arrive at the border, likewise like an airport, you meet all the officials lodged in one infrastructure. The system is digitalized. When you give your documents to the first officer, everything goes digital and you have your walkway through. That phenomenon has cut down, for example, the case of Mombasa to Kampala. It has been able to cut down movement of goods from Mombasa, port of Mombasa to the city of Kampala in Uganda from 14 days to basically 3 to 4 days. And when we talk about cutting down time across the borders, it goes with cutting down cost. Because when you talk about 14 days, you take the cost of maintaining a truck driver for over 14 days to cover a distance. When it moves down to 3 days, that implies you have cut down your costs at least to 25%, from 100 to 25%. And this equally works on the prices of your goods to the final consumer, which will now be able to fuel some money in his pocket that was previously used to purchase a good, but today they fuel some leftovers after purchasing this same quantity of goods. And then how are women taking advantage of the AfCFTA? Currently in COMESA, they have what they call the simplified trade regime, where a certain quantity of goods moves across the border without paying custom duties. And the list of products that are eligible for this regime are pasted at each border. For example, we have cereals like maize, beans, groundnut, soybeans, to a value of $2,000 can actually move across the borders now, before even the coming of the AfCFTA, without paying custom duties. And in a study that we carried out in Cameroon, it was revealed that numerically, women are superior in informal cross-border trade than men. But in terms of volume of trade, men are trading more than women. Because we actually stood at the border for 3 months. We wanted to understand who owns what. When you see a consolidated truck coming, you can find more than 30 women owning small packets of goods in this truck. So the consolidated cargo is not owned by a single trader, but it's owned by a group of traders. But when we see one cargo, which is owned by a single trader, likely the possibility was that it is owned by a man. So we started to find out what are the challenges that women are facing to be able to grow their volume of trade comparable to men. First of all, stereotypes. Microfinance institutions don't want to lend money to women. They say you must be married, your husband must give you a letter, a standby letter of credit to say if you don't pay, you will be able to pay. Land ownership is another problem. And then early access to business opportunity. You know, most of our young women in Africa, when they drop out from school, one reason is likely that of pregnancy, early pregnancy, that brings them out of school. They need to raise a child, whereas a man does not have such challenges. And these are issues that the AfCFTA Protocol on Women and Youth is seeking to address, to say that no, childbearing should not be an obstacle to women. So these are things that are being incorporated into the draft, and which will now be tailored by experts to give it a sound technical terminology that we will seek to address. So these are some of the challenges that women are facing in informal cross-border trade. And when we look at the type of goods, which type of goods are women trading in? Synthetic hair, cosmetic products, agricultural products. These are basically where women were trading in, according to our findings. And where are men trading in? Spare parts, automobile parts, electronic, yes, electronic. We have school furniture and other capital intensive goods. So when you look at now the profit margin, the likelihood is that women trading in agricultural products will make little profit compared to men who are doing in automotive parts, electronic products, and other processed goods.
Yes.
So how do we strike a balance? What should government do? Now, the problem of existing policies. Are these policies gender biased? Yes. Some of the policies, in the work that I did for ITC, some of the policies are actually gender biased. And we hope that with the coming of the AfCFTA, countries will now need to align their domestic policies with the AfCFTA requirement to be able to give women a level terrain where they can play along with men in cross-border trade. So this, yes. So these are some of the issues.
Yeah, I'm glad that you have shared some of the products, commodities, because it's all part of the opportunities. Most of the time when I look at the economy, I know that the economy is driven by a lot of economic sectors. And then from the AfCFTA perspective, I think the strength behind each and every country comes with different resources that that country has got. So I always I get excited when I look at the map of Africa and I start plucking in, okay, when you go to Ghana and you start looking at the textile industry, if I go to DRC and I'm thinking of the mining, I'm thinking of copper as well. And I start thinking of agriculture. I look at South Africa, what the strength of South Africa is, which means that Africa as a whole has got a lot of capabilities and a lot of resources. Now, let's look at AfCFTA, because I always say that you can't do everything at once. But we know that this integration and bringing these fragmented economies together, we need to start somewhere. Where do we start? I love what is happening. I mean, I was reading a few days ago, I think on Monday, that in the US, Joe Biden wants to have a conversation with South Africa around food security, because food security is the biggest challenge. And I just assumed that, gee, now let's look at poverty, look at agriculture. Maybe let's start there, but there's other things which are the biggest resources that we are not beneficiating as Africans. So what's priority? Let me be straight. Let me ask you that straight questions. Looking at all these economic sectors, which ones do we start with? Because that's where you start having a prioritized implementation plan around where do we have, number one, and the skills, where are we lacking, and what are we left with in Africa? Because Africa has been taken, the resources has been taken for the past few years. What are we left with right now?
Yeah, thank you, Lebo. Where are the priorities? An interesting question. Lebo, the priorities have been highlighted in what we call the national implementation strategies of the African Continental Free Trade Area. The word national in a continental framework still comes up. However, after working at the national level, and this has been supported by the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, I think basically all countries are now endowed with national implementation strategies where their priorities have been highlighted.
Mm.
There were studies that were carried out to actually see the strengths and weaknesses of each country in terms of the AfCFTA. And when the national implementation strategies were published, I went through a couple of them to actually see who is having what. The biggest asset we have is regional value chain. We need to interconnect our industries. You talked about agriculture. When we look at the agriculture and climatic specificities of the continent, where I come from, we are in the equatorial forest. We are endowed with wood timber. We are endowed with cocoa and coffee. We are endowed with cereals and tubers.
Mm.
How do we make this an engine in the South African transformative industry?
Yes.
That's where value chains come in.
Mm.
And for value chains to be able to develop, we need an integrated logistics sector.
Mm.
And I can assure you, there has been work on the continent in terms of connecting Africa by road transport. I'm always amazed when I log onto LinkedIn each time I see Mark Antony publishing the inauguration of infrastructure. Just some few days we were in Arusha, where an infrastructure connecting Kenya to Tanzania was being inaugurated.
Mm.
The other day it was the Trans-African Highway going through linking 5 countries in West Africa.
Mm.
I think this is what has characterized Africa for the past 10 years. And we are actually connecting the continent through the Trans-African Highway. In terms of air transport, Lebo, I've been traveling for the past 12 years. I have been a witness of the change in terms of air connectivity on the continent. Africa is definitely moving, and when you equally look at railway transport, we think of Mombasa-Nairobi Railway, and we think of equally other railway development projects that are ongoing on the continent. There has been massive investment in this sector connecting our continent. If this is done properly, connecting resources and industrial hubs, and that is how most countries have been developed.
Yes.
Because you don't just create roads out of imagination, you create roads out of feasibility studies. Let roads be linked to raw material hubs, to industrial hubs. And that is why I equally talked about South Africa, because in my few trips in South Africa, I've been able to meet with real development companies that actually wanted to tap in from a wood sector in Cameroon that will serve to be able to construct rail routes across the continent. But then the connectivity was lacking. The connectivity, the shipping industry is not connected on the continent.
Mm.
When you want to move goods from Cameroon to South Africa, the tendency is that you might likely go through Ansveld before moving in Europe, before moving to South Africa. And you can imagine the cost of that. We need to own vessels on the continent. The time for Africa to own vessels is now, because the massive bulk of transport in terms of goods across the world is done by sea. It is economically viable and it is business friendly. We need to start thinking of owning vessels. And that's why this discussion must move into the African Union platform. We need to carry this discussion to the African Union to be able to uphold the African integrated maritime strategy that was put in place under Madame Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma. This is a robust framework that seeks to develop a maritime transport industry. And if this is properly done, it will contribute to the African continental free trade area. We cannot transport timber by air.
Yeah.
That's impossible. And we cannot easily move timber by rail. The existential network of rail is not well connected, but the seas are already there. We can move our goods by sea. Then how do we build in to the maritime industry? I think, Lebo, this is an assignment I'm giving you to be able to trigger a discussion in this framework, how we connect our transport networks to be able to make the AfCFTA a reality on the continent. And one other aspect which I really appreciate with the AfCFTA is that in terms of services liberalization, we have 5 priority services area which were earmarked, and negotiations are ongoing to finalize the sectors of specific commitment by various countries. We have transport services, Road transport services has been earmarked as a priority area where we need to liberalize. What does that imply? That implies when you have a truck registered in Egypt, you should be able to drive your truck to South Africa without having to comply with the 10 or 15 countries that you are crossing. Just with your AfCFTA transport documents, you are able to move your goods across the entire continent without having to comply again with specific national or regional legislation in the country. This is something which is appreciative. We equally have telecommunication services. We have telecommunication services that are under liberalization. Remember, Lebo, for me to give you a direct call from Cameroon to South Africa, I'm paying practically 20 times what somebody from France is paying when calling Germany in the same country. Definitely. So liberalization is taking place in telecommunication. We equally have financial services. We understand that our central banks are not interconnected. And when you want to move money from one country to the other, where they have a different central bank, it's a cumbersome process. And even the commercial banks themselves, they are not interconnected. So the AfCFTA has taken on itself to be able to liberalize the financial sector for us to make the best out of it under the African Center. The tourism sector as well, and when we talk about the tourism sector, we are talking about the movement of people, visa requirements to move from one country to the other. There has equally been considerable progress on the continent in terms of visa issuance, either electronic visa, either no visa at all. We have countries where you can go without a visa. We have the case of Rwanda, we have Benin, Seychelles, Mauritius Island. These are a few countries that have been able to show us how waiving visa for Africans can bring about significant benefit to the tourism industry. And when we are talking about tourism, we are talking equally about SMEs in the handicraft sector. We are talking about women, giving women a fair share of the tourism sector. It's not rocket science to say that the tourism sector employs more women than men, because when you go into hotels, most of the workers, in this industry are women. The handicraft sector as well. In my community, where I come from in Cameroon, you still have our old mothers who are weaving baskets and doing some craft work with their hands, which costs quite significant amount of money, and which we think that if the tourism sector is unleashed to explore its full potential, these mothers are going to sit in their villages and make the best out of the African continental free trade area.
Clearly, there's a lot of opportunities, Cham, and there's still a lot of work that we need to do from a country perspective. And for me, it's more of those enablers more than anything, because you can have a product, but how do we ensure that the ultimate product gets to where it's supposed to go to? And you just brought through an element of infrastructure in Africa, which is a horrible nightmare. And I will use DRC as an example. DRC has got a lot of resources. There's a lot of mines in DRC. There's a lot of export, there's an export market going to China and so forth in terms of their resources. However, if you look at the road conditions, at this point in time, it means that there's a work that needs to happen there. There's investment that needs to be injected on the road infrastructure as well. So we need to really invest on that. But another one that for me I love as well is an issue of maritime, owning vessels. My goodness, I think it's been years. I said that in South Africa years and many moons ago, when some of us were still thinking of getting into logistics, and we used to have, I think, some vessels which were sold. And then what happened to that? And this is where we are now as Africa. And we are saying that the time is now for us to own that specific vessels. And well, it's going to take the next few years to build one, to come up with something that works for Africa. But as we build it, it's part of the infrastructure. And when you look at what we want to achieve, it goes back also to that question that I was asking around the products. Number one, the resources. What do we need to start exporting, intra-trading, intercontinental trading as well? How do we move all of these commodities and also the final products as well? I think that is exactly that. But we're also realizing that access and exporting requires now that the maritime industry be looked at. And the maritime, look at the investment in terms of the vessels, we've got the waters out there in terms of access corridors as well into Europe, into all these other countries. And that's where we need to start looking at it. And then also an element of now saying that the logistics network redesign. How do we really design that to make sure that it works for us as Africa as well? So,
Yes.
so it's very important. So I saw there was a question, in fact, that speaks to vessels, and we were touch basing on it. But the question was really around if you'll be able to complete the free trade when we have less contribution to vessel ownership that is regulated by the Western regulations. And understanding that the free trade is meant to reduce the intercontinental trade value aimed at cutting costs. However, it's then that the value of shipping per dollar rate is high in the West, which I really agree. I think also we're very inefficient as in terms of management of our ports. I have to say that a couple of years ago, when I look at our ports in South Africa, it was one of the efficient ports. Right now, it is not. And we are seeking private-public partnerships out there, again, to help us develop and maintain as well. So I think that's a valid question,
Yes.
which speaks to what we are talking about in terms of enabling that to happen.
Yes, Lebo, you said you raised a point, which is a point that I think many experts have been looking at on the continent. How do we redesign? Remember, Lebo, our export infrastructure has reflected the colonial economy. Yes, when you look at the economic history of Africa, you realize that our trade infrastructure reflects the colonial demand. We have developed ports across the years, and these ports were meant to export raw material to feed the Industrial Revolution in Europe. Now, how do we redesign our infrastructure to be inward looking? How do we connect, for example, Cameroon to Central African Republic, which is a landlocked country that has something to offer in terms of trade with Cameroon? This is where the AfCFTA must prove to be an African concept for Africans towards the Africa we want. If we keep maintaining, seeking funding for or borrowing money from the external partners to develop ports, then we are still aligned to what was led to us during the colonial era. You've raised about South African maritime industry. I've participated in 1 or 2 events in South Africa in Operation Pakisa, which is actually the government roadmap to redevelop the South African economy. My very good friend, Commandant Tete Mokele, who is the former CEO of SAMSA, he actually presented the maritime industry development roadmap in South Africa, which to me, I think can serve as a benchmark for other countries to be able to develop, because the manpower today in Africa is gradually phasing out imported manpower in the maritime industry. And I think the ratio today has crossed 50% of South Africans working in the South African maritime industry. And this is exactly what we need to do on the continent. Because, if you lack knowledge in an industry, you'll be lacking the benefits of that industry. The case of DRC, which you've highlighted severally, this is the richest country in terms of mineral deposits in the world, but it's rather the poorest country in terms of economic and social development in the world. How do you understand such a paradox? This is we need a paradigm shift on the continent. We need to benchmark on continental best practices that has worked to be able to move our continent forward. Actually, the AfCFTA cannot be an answer to all level. We need to look at the overall program of the continent, the Agenda 2063. In this continental program, there are other components. For example, we have been talking about infrastructural development. There is a specific program at the level of the African Union, the PIDA, Program for Infrastructural Development for Africa, which is the program that is driving the infrastructure development on the continent. And I can assure you it's a huge success. We equally have AIDA, Accelerating Industrial Development on the continent, which is, when you look at each member state of the African Union today, they have industrial development master plans. which stems from this accelerated industrial development in Africa that was put in place in 2013. We equally have a continental agricultural development scheme, which Ethiopia has used to be able to grow its agricultural sector. Yes, it is a comprehensive African agricultural development plan. Ethiopia has used this, and today Ethiopia is exporting wheat flour. We are talking about Ukraine and Russia today, but Ethiopia is moving around in African countries to tell them that we actually have what you were buying from Russia and Ukraine. So please buy it now from us. And I must give you a secret. Ethiopia is one of the highest vessel-owning countries on the continent, whereas they are not a coastal country. They don't have access to the sea, but they are one of the highest vessel-owning countries on the continent. Yes, because they have seen a benefit and they realize that as a landlocked country, if they have to rely on external demand for vessels, it might pose a serious problem one day. So they went into tanker vessels to be able to export their oil. And they're using neighboring ports through regional economic arrangements, and they are making business out of that. Why not own vessels at its worst back in the days? In Cameroon, we had Camship, which was a government-owned shipping line. There were Black Stars in Ghana. We have Super Eagle in Nigeria, and a host of other African countries own vessels. But due to programs that were imported and imposed on Africa under the structural adjustment programs in the 80s, our countries were pushed to privatize this sector for the benefit of Western shipping lines. So when we come
as long as I think we are here, the reason that we are here and we are having these discussions, and I always say that everyone that I bring on board as part of the discussion, they don't just talk, they also implement. And you bring a very critical point of saying that we have messed up as Africa. I always, for me, I'm always very clear around the decisions that we have made as Africa. We've messed up and we've made certain decisions, and it's okay. We have made those decisions. And the reason that we are here is to now transform Africa and put it at a platform where it has to be, we want to be developed, and it has to take us with our resources, our capabilities to implement that. We may not win now, but we're also creating that path and planting the seeds for other people to take over as part of the process. And all of that as well, it also comes with saying that what is our strengths, and you clearly articulating the strengths of Ethiopia, the strengths of Cameroon, the strength of each and every country. And now we have to now start unpacking that with each and everyone's strengths. Who's going to drive what in terms of the process as well? Because I don't think we've been honest enough to really do that. I think, you take just at the far end, look at the mirror and say that this is what Cameroon is good at, this is what Ethiopia is good at. But we don't really want to, and which is one of my challenges. And I want us to really talk about the challenges around the implementation. And whilst I really bring this point across around our strengths as different countries, our priorities as different countries, each and every country has got a priority in terms of what we are driving. We are driving NDP, there's a lot of priorities in South Africa, the same as Cameroon as well, which may be totally different. But ultimately, we want to integrate all these economic transformational initiatives into one. How are we going to do this? I have my own thoughts, but how are we going to do this? Because if I'm in DRC, I will say, guys, out of all the countries, I've got all the resources. South Africa, what did you do with your gold? What did you do with your chrome? What did you do with your coal? You understand? I've got as much as I can. In fact, I've got diamonds as well as the country. So I am priority. Cameroon will come and say, listen, we've got all the skills. We understand everything about trading, by the way. So, we can come and guide, bring policy forward. Ghana at the same time will say, no. We have a specific skill as Ghana that we can bring on board. So tell me, Sham, who is prioritized at the African Union perspective? And when you think out there, how do we prioritize in terms, because we've already said that we've got different economic sector. Now I'm going to the country perspective now, saying that as Mr. Cyril Ramaphosa, South Africa comes first. A couple of years ago, we've always said that we are leading Africa. Nigeria will say, no, 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 we have bypassed you. South Africa as well, we are good. So please just articulate that for us. Thank you.
Yeah, Lebo, who is prioritized over the other? No, nobody is prioritized over the other. When you follow development of the AfCFTA on the continent each day, I'm comfortable to believe that we know exactly where we are going to. Before I move into your answer, let me complete some few points on the holistic approach of the continent. Because if we don't understand, if we look at the AfCFTA as something that is hanging, it gives the impression that there is nothing that's going to work. The AfCFTA is a child of the African Union, and it does not stop the African Union from working. They look at the load that the AfCFTA is going to carry, and they created a secretariat for the secretariat to run issues on trade, for the secretariat to run issues that are complementary to make trade to move. But at the level of the African Union, there is still work that is going on. I talked about Agenda 2063, where I highlighted PIDA, infrastructure. I highlighted the Comprehensive African Agricultural Development Plan. I highlighted the AIDA, Accelerating Industrial Development in Africa. And I want to also bring us back to the Yamoussoukro decision, which is a decision that forefathers thought of liberating the African air transport sector to create a single regulatory framework for the African sky. This is working in Europe. We ask ourselves at times, why is it that flying from Oslo to Paris costs 10 times less than flying from Cameroon to South Africa? It's because they have a single air transport regime. And that is where we are moving into. We have the single African air transport market. The protocol is already on for signature. And then we need 15 signatures for ratification, and then it will go operational. What does this seek to do? It seeks to eliminate the landing and airport taxes that African airlines, for example, like the former South African airline, Ethiopian airline, Kenya airline, when they'll be moving around the continent, once this goes operational, they will not be paying landing taxes again in African airports. And this takes a huge part of the ticket that we buy when we fly across Africa. And that will cut airfare on the continent significantly to 30%. And that will boost the tourism industry. And we'll be able to travel around the continent. And good news for you, Lebo. Last week, Cameroon has implemented electronic visa. So if you're coming to Cameroon, if you're in Durban, you don't need to move to Pretoria to apply for your visa. You just go online, you apply for your visa, and then you come to Cameroon. I know what triggered this. It is the African Integration Index that's published by the African Development Bank, which seeks to understand countries that are making progress in terms of facilitating intra-African movement. So we are definitely, yes, we are definitely moving to visa
in the right direction.
Yes, yes. So in Cameroon, this is one of the recommendations that we did when we were doing the national implementation strategy of the AfCFTA. We called on our government to institute an electronic visa. And why not even visa on arrival? Because we have a lot of countries where people want to move to Cameroon to do business, but they cannot, because for them to have visa, you need to fly to another country, get your visa, go back to your country and prepare for your trip to Cameroon, which is costly. Why would they not go to Rwanda, which gives visa on arrival, or 30 days, no visa? It takes you 6 hours in Rwanda to register your business. 6 hours, labor. If you're a business person, will you not go to Rwanda? So we in Cameroon, we are working on that. And this is what we call complementary measures that country must take. The benefits of the AfCFTA are not automatic. Nobody should fool you. They are not automatic. Each country must design a strategy on how they want to benefit from the AfCFTA. Outline their priorities, be able to identify the challenges. You need to do a SWOT analysis of the AfCFTA and see where your strength is. And then you say, in the next 5 years, we'll capitalize on our strength. And then the next 10 years, we'll work our weaknesses to be able to cut red tapes and be able to make them become competitive for us to do business under the AfCFTA. Because when we talk about a protocol on investment, this protocol is just facilitating and promoting investment. There are other complementary measures like land reform, access to land, that will remain a sovereign decision of the state parties of the African Continental Free Trade Area. How do you implement a land regime that attract investors who want to invest in agriculture? Somebody bringing in $2 billion investment, maybe to do rice farming in your country. How do you attract that person with land reforms? I think this is a serious problem across the entire continent. Land remains a serious problem, but paradoxically, we have the largest arable land in the world, but yet we are importing more than what we produce in terms of agricultural trade. Paradoxically, a report has shown that Africa trades more in agricultural products among itself. But again, we import more agricultural products than what we trade among ourselves.
It just doesn't make sense.
Yes, it shows that we have a huge potential under the AfCFTA. We have the possibility to invest in the agricultural sector and export it on the continent under the African Continental Free Trade Area than importing outside Africa. Labour, I think we have a lot to offer. And we are ready to attract foreign direct investment. And that's why the protocol on investment came in. I know today we cannot talk about investment without talking about sustainability. And I think that is what prompted policymakers to be able to give the mandate to the African Union to conduct negotiations for e-commerce and a protocol on women and the youth.
Yeah, indeed. I think, Sham, we need to continue with this conversation because for me, continued conversations in Africa also
Lebo, please permit me address your question, which was on prioritization.
Yes.
I was saying that nobody is prioritized to the detriment of the other. The African Free Exim Bank has allocated what they call the Adjustment Facility Fund. We know there will be sectors of economies that will face the shocks of the AfCFTA. For example, there are projections that the textile sector in some countries might face the shocks of import from other countries, which are already well placed to take advantage of the AfCFTA to export their textile products. I want to cite here the case of Ethiopia, which is well anchored in terms of textile. They were doing this under the AGOA, but today the AfCFTA is offering them another platform to sell their textile products. I'll take the case of Kenya, which equally was building the textile industry under the African Growth and Opportunity Act for the US market. But today, textile is being negotiated under the African Continental Free Trade Area. We will not tell them that, no, you were doing that for AGOA. You cannot do that for AfCFTA. They equally take advantage of the AfCFTA market. So this adjustment facility fund that has been allocated by AfriExim seeks to come into this country that is feeling the shock, the adverse effects of textile imports under the AfCFTA to say, okay, since your textile industry was at the nursery level, we will be pumping in $5 million for machinery purchase and electricity generation in your economy so that you can produce the textile that can put you at a competitive level with the countries that are sending in their textile into your country. So is somebody prioritized against the other? I don't think so. So this facility is seeking to make smaller countries also enjoy the benefits of the African Continental Free Trade Area. If it is food import that is killing your domestic food industry, AfriExim will come in with money to buy the agricultural machinery that you need to trigger your agricultural sector so that you will produce and not only export on the continent, but export out of the continent. Remember today, Namibia under AGOA is exporting meat to the US market. Yes, and that was done under AGOA. But that meat equally will be exported to Egypt, will be exported to Cameroon under the AfCFTA. So there is everything for each African country to make out of the AfCFTA. Nobody's going to lose, nobody's going to win. But there is this tendency, because we must be realistic, that over a short period of time, there will be countries that will face negative effects of the AfCFTA, but corrective measures will be brought in. And remember, Lebo, I talked about complementary domestic measures that countries must take. I think the assemblers of ITAC, the International Trade Administration Commission in South Africa, must be present in each and every African country. Definitely. In my country, we don't have that.
I agree.
We don't have the assemblers of ITAC in Cameroon because we need to check dumping. We need to check subsidized export. We need to check subsidized export. Some countries might be producing more expensive, but due to government subsidies, they can export and sell at the same rate in other countries. This, even right at the level of the World Trade Organization, is forbidden. Subsidized export. We need to have administrations that have the technical capacity to be able to conduct investigations that are linked with dumping and subsidized export.
I like that because that's one of the questions that always comes, that it doesn't matter because business going into Africa, everyone say, I want to go near, there's always this near Africa strategy. And say that we beneficiate and so forth, or we want to build our textile industry. South Africa is, is building a lot of townships, looking at the agriculture sector across Africa as well, and education, which is one of the critical elements. Right now, where we are as Africa, the question is, how do we ensure that part of our reliance in some of these countries is reduced? It's really now making a decision as a country to say, now we do not import any t-shirts, we do not import certain cutlery. We look at the statistics as to how much we are importing with the tiles, with cement. I'm just using stupid examples, but this is real examples of businesses for companies, for South Africa, for South Africans as well. So we need to get to that point. For me, it's really that element is irrespective of what we are saying. We need to get to a point where we impose penalties as well, where we are saying that we cannot allow certain commodities, certain products, certain final products or semi-finished products coming into our country because we are driving industrialization. We are driving that.
Lebo, let's not forget, most African countries are members of the WTO. Even the AfCFTA is a child of the World Trade Organization. And at the level of the WTO, we have engagements. We have taken engagements. We cannot stand up one morning and ban import of products without a scientific justification. It is forbidden. And then again, look at SACU. SACU has signed an interim economic partnership agreement with the EU. That's a legal entanglement. Yeah.
I saw that. And also I can bring also BRICS, because South Africa is member of the BRICS countries. Between Brazil, Russia, China, and South Africa is part of it. So within that relationship, there's certain things that are happening, and with different portfolios within BRICS that are driving infrastructure development, skills development, and this and this. I mean, I can name them. So But for me, I think some of these agreements, yes, we have to participate. It's like being a friend. You can't always be a friend of South Africans only. I'm the friend of the Cameroonians. I'm a friend of Shan. I'm a friend of someone in Nigeria. I'm a friend of someone from the business, from the colleague perspective, from the industry perspective. And South Africa, Africa, Cameroon, everyone coming together, we want to be developed, because as economists, we are competing, at a certain level. So that relationship, and we want funding, we want that investment. For me, what now, Cham? I know I'm trying to put you in a corner.
I like that, Lebo. I like that, but the reality is something else. Remember, we had our independence when other countries were industrialized.
Yeah, I agree.
And as young countries, they told us this is how the world is moving. We cannot go back. Let me just tell you something. This is Cameroon, our Ministry of Trade, within our 10-year development strategy, that's the national development strategy of the country, 2020-2030. The government embarked on import substitution. You know what happened?
Yeah.
Some of us told the government that you cannot do import substitution today. That was used in the 60s.
Yes.
Today it cannot go because we now have what we call trade liberalization. In the 1960s, the World Trade Organization was not there. It came in 1994, 1995, it started operations. And our engagement at the WTO does not allow us to do import substitution. You cannot tell a country, I will no more be importing this because I want to develop it in my country. It cannot work again today. And this is the trap in which we find ourselves as Africans and developing countries. Because the level of liberalization does not give room for countries, because even the Europe and Americas, they developed through protectionism. They have to protect their infant industries and develop before now opening up, because they need new markets for their product. What do we have to sell? We have raw material. We have raw material. Research has proven that we have two major cocoa exporters in Africa, Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire. But they have just 10% of the total product from the cocoa value chain. 90% goes to other economies. So these are the problems that we have. And they cannot sit up one day and say, we are stopping to export cocoa. You can't do that.
We have nice problems, Cham. We have very nice life problems.
Yes. So the truth is that we are part of the international community, the multilateral trading system. And it's a rule-based trading system. At the end of the AfCFTA process, we will do what we call a notification process at the WTO. We will carry the AfCFTA, we'll go and deposit it in Geneva and say, this is a new regional trade arrangement for African countries.
Yeah.
And we'll profile it. A least problem they will find in it, they will say, we are not approving this.
Yes.
Problem. So for us to be successful, we need to be checking at each level. We need to check if it is WTO compliant. Yes, we need to ensure that. And I know the process is on because His Excellency Wam Kelemene is a son of the WTO. He was head of mission for South Africa there, so he knows the mechanisms there. But I don't think he will allow any error. So that is where we are. Everything we are doing, we must comply with dispositions of the WTO. So we are integrating.
I think you have to promise me that we are going to continue with this conversation on a monthly basis, because I want to make sure that business understands how they can contribute to AfCFTA. As a small business there, I want you to understand how you can find opportunities and how you can also contribute as a professional out there, being a supply chain person, being a buyer out there. When you start procuring and say, oh, I'm buying from China, you have to start asking yourself a lot of questions as to why you have to buy there. Now you have to start thinking as an ESD person, a supply development professional. How do we start industrializing? How do you start looking at the value chain of your sector and really looking at what you are utilizing, where you are procuring it? How do we start now linking up with the Department of Trade and Industry in all the countries? And I'm not just only talking about South Africa, to build those skills, to build those industrialists in Africa. That's exactly what you need to do. And Sham, you spoke around the value chain. Let's unpack those value chains. Let's understand them as well, because we really need to contribute towards building the Africa that we want. I would want to really continue with this conversation. And one of the conversations for me is around the investments, around the funding as well. What does it really mean? Because with all this infrastructure, it has to be funded. How have we enabled such funding to happen without really falling into a trap as Africa to rely? Because we know some of the African countries, and I don't want to really name them, I'll get into trouble, where we know that some of the Chinese governments have taken over, the resources, the infrastructure of the government of the country because of the funding that has been given to them to develop. my sensitivity, and I want us to think around that. You don't even have to, I don't want us to discuss it now. In the future, in our next conversation, how do we sign those agreements that are not going to get us into trouble as we build this Africa that we want, to make sure that the funding that we are getting is not the funding that gives away our resources as well. Because I really look at the Africa that we will continue to be sustainable, an Africa that will provide opportunities, an Africa that will alleviate poverty, create employment as well, and ensuring that an unemployed youth out there understand that they have an option to study, be a professional that contribute to building the Africa, or they continue to build their business acumen as well so that they can run their businesses. So all of that for me is very, very critical, for all of us as well as the descendants of Africa in really building what we want. So ladies and gentlemen, I really want to see if there's last questions to Sham before we close this conversation. Let me tell you, I'm not stopping now. I'll make sure that I keep on breaking Sham. He travels a lot. I can assure you, so that we have more of this conversation, so that you understand it. Because sometimes we get to look at AfCFTA as this, oh, that's another policy. It's not just another policy. I want everyone to understand what AfCFTA really is and what does it mean for yourself, for your kids, for your grandkids, for your grandkids as well. What does AfCFTA mean for you? You're running a business, you're building a legacy, you are a big organization, you have skills. How are you going to contribute to this AfCFTA that we want? It's not a supply chain conversation. I'm going to remind you, it's a conversation for all of us. Any profession that we know, it's a conversation that we need to start thinking of. So I'm going to look at the last question, but as I do that, Sham, for me, August is women's, we have Women's Day in August. So I want to know, what does AfCFTA say for women, just at a high level? What does it really mean? And I know you've said a lot, but now let's just being specific. And in fact, I saw a question. I must just quickly just check. It's something to do with women. I think that question was, was really around funding for developing women, number one. And then there was a comment, what's in AfCFTA for Africa's women? I loved it. And I think that question was even asked by a male. So for me, at a high level, so that we can close the conversation, Sham, and I'm going to check some last comments and questions that has been put on the chat box. You can continue, Sham.
Yes. Okay. Thank you, Lebo. Actually, the African Continental Free Trade Area, currently as we speak, has given women on the continent the voice to speak. The consultation process is ongoing. It is an opportunity for women to bring themselves together. For example, I've had to work with the Pan-African Business Women Association, PABWA, which is equally based in South Africa, piloted by one of my sisters there, Yavi Madurai. These are platforms that you need to carry out, first of all, an internal assessment process to be able to understand what are the challenges women business associations are going through over the years. And you look at the regulatory framework of the AfCFTA and seek to understand what is lacking for women, because the comprehensive agreement already provides huge potential for women to make the best out of it. But what are the specific challenges now that are only affecting women in terms of gender, and how can that be addressed? It is important because partners have allocated funding for consultation processes, funding for drafting of the protocol, and funding to pay women from all parts of the continent to converge in Accra and be able to make their voices heard. GIZ is working on that. UNDP has allocated a specific package to address this. And we have European Union as well coming in. Even the Secretariat itself has imposed, yes, the presence of women in this process. Not people coming to speak for women, but let women themselves speak for themselves. So I think this provides women a platform where they can be part of the entire process, because it will not end with consultations. It will equally move forward with implementation. Last month, I was listening to President Paul Kagame during the Commonwealth Head of State and Government meeting, where he said, you can have the best legislation in the world. Once it lacks implementation, it is not a legislation, it's a paper, just like any other paper. And that is what has driven Rwanda for over the 28 years to the level where it is today. It is all about implementation. When this year, the Doing Business report is published, and Rwanda is 50 places behind, they sit down and start strategizing. How do we move? Who is to implement what? You have to put anybody at a level of responsibility. Don't say the private sector will just consult you. You don't consult the private sector and leave. Let the private sector be part of the process. And I think the AfCFTA has already done that. The private sector is part of the process in Accra. They have a voice in all the processes that are going on there. They speak for themselves. Nobody speaks for them. They speak for themselves. And now what they need to do is they need to break down into components, because 3 or 4 persons cannot speak for a whole continent, covering all sectors. We need the financial sector to be able to speak for itself. We need the tourism sector to be able to speak for itself. We need the manufacturing sector to be able, because they have the specific challenges.
Definitely.
And that is how, when you look at other parts of the world, you think the laws at the level of the WTO are meant by policymakers? No. They are done by lobby groups. Go to Geneva and see the degree of lobbying that takes place there. I challenge you to attend the public forum that will take place in September from the 27th to the 30th. You will see the power, the strength of lobbies at the WTO. The public forum is a place where they come and showcase their strength. They are actually those who pilot the design of legislation and they hand it to their government, and now they circulate it to other countries. That's how it takes place. Government does not do business. If government makes any legislation entirely, it will not work for the private sector. The private sector is supposed to draft their legislation, send it to government. Government will review it, make their input so that the interest of the government too is protected, and they now carry it forward. And that is what brought the Nigerian government back on the 21st of March, 2018, when the Nigerian president was about to board his aircraft, the Falcon Super Eagle, to Kigali. The private sector say, Mr. President, if you're moving, elections are coming up, you will not be voted, because we were not consulted in this process. And the president stayed behind. It took Nigeria another 1 year in Niamey, Niger, for the Nigerian president to sign on to the AfCFTA agreement.
Yeah, true.
Yes, and the domestic process was respected. The private sector was consulted. And today, as we speak, the private sector in Nigeria is part of the process. Their voices, their voices are heard at each stage of the process. Because they are those who will be told, government does not do business. I always like to say this, it's the private sector that does business. So you don't make the laws for them, you allow them to give their input. You make a call for public submission towards drafting of a new legislation. And when they do that, you now work on their point to be able to come up with an inclusive legal framework. If that is not done, then government is working on its own.
All right. Sean, thank you so much for this discussion. I know between the two of us, we can go on for the whole day. Like I said, I would want us to continue with this conversation. It has been great having you on board. I think everyone has learned a lot, and they're starting to ask questions as to what's next, what needs to happen.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's what in everyone's mind. And how do they participate? How do they now reposition themselves as well? So I'm encouraging everyone out there that please ensure that if you need information, you want to communicate further with myself, with Sham, we are available, and we will put our details.
Lebo, sorry.
Yes.
I think you need to check the chat room. I see somebody's talking. While you're checking the chat room, I must say that
I was going to go to that as well.
Yes.
Okay, you can proceed.
Yes, I must say the way forward, as you rightly said, because we must always understand now, after we've talked about the AfCFTA, what is the next step? What do we want participants to do?
Yes.
It is very important for participants to understand that private sector is part and parcel of the process. You cannot go as individuals. You need to organize yourself. The organized private sector is the best way you can make your voices being heard. Once you organize yourselves, do an industry research and make your position in a written form.
Yeah,
organize yourself. First of all, engage in the discussion at the national level, at the sub-regional level, and at the continental level. I urge you to go on debate on medias, on Sundays, on weekends, Fridays or Saturdays, Sundays. Go on national medias and make your voices heard. From there, this has worked in other countries. I have people I will not cite here where ministers have asked for them to come for consultations because they've gone on media, they've been able to make their positions be heard, and the minister has seen value addition in what they are saying, and they were involved in the process. And remember, at each level, in different national platforms, there is what we call the National Implementation Committee. In South Africa, you have it. In Cameroon, you have it. It is a recommendation, it's a policy recommendation for each country to have a National Implementation Committee. These are the committees that are in charge of hearing all the challenges at the national level and looking for mechanisms for a proper implementation of the AfCFTA. So please make sure you are part and parcel of this process at your national level, at the regional level, and then you go at the continental level.
Well, I can tell you, we were asked to do some logistics network redesign. And I said, with so many countries, it's going to take me a couple of months to be able to do that. But yes, we are very instrumental and really willing to always contribute, and also to pull in the resources from the people that we know to contribute as well their expert knowledge to all of this. So I'm just checking, there's some few questions here. What does it mean for the youth? There's a question around the youth, that what does AfCFTA really mean for the youth in Africa?
Yes, just to say that currently I will speak, I don't know if the meeting is over. There was a meeting, an ECOSOC meeting in Zambia.
Yes.
Bringing on board youth on the continent towards the protocol on women and youth. I think if the AfCFTA Secretariat has been able to yield to the call for a protocol that addresses issues related to women and the youth, then the place of the youth is a non-negligible one in the AfCFTA process. So please, there are canals, there are channels through which you have to communicate. If you want to communicate to the Secretariat, draft your position in written form and send it to the Secretariat and copy your ministry in charge of youth affairs, in charge of trade policy, in charge of investment, in charge of industrialization at your national respective member states. In that way, your voices will be heard. Our voices cannot be heard in a disparate way. And that is why at the level of the African Union, there is a youth parliament. And this youth parliament has representatives from each member state of the union. And the AfCFTA equally is conducting a process whereby youth are tabling their problems. We have partners like GIZ that has been sponsoring these national consultative processes in member states. So just be on alert, listen to information. If you hear about this process, please be part and parcel of it. You are the future of the continent and you are the present of the continent, because we cannot talk about the youth being the future when they are not part of what the decision that is being taken today. Yes.
I agree. You heard it, guys. You are part of the solution. You are the part of the people that will be making a difference in Africa. So let us contribute to making sure that our capabilities are and our skills are heard, and we cannot do it in isolation. We cannot expect anyone to do it for us as well. The movement is huge, and part of the movement is to ensure that all of you are part and parcel of this process. So let me see if there is any other question so that we can wrap up. There is a question around, all right, starting the national shipping, let's see, in Ghana. I'm just trying to read that comment. I think the comment is really around not getting response from Ghana, and the initiative that is being driven to pave the way forward in terms of the process and looking at the national shipping line for Africa. And this person said that they are currently working for Scan Global Logistics, a Danish company, which can support with the whole process as well.
Yeah, that's good development.
Because I think, Surrender, that's exactly what we are talking about, and starting somewhere, and part of it, and really ensuring that we align with the initiative, because I can assure you from the logistics perspective, it's one of the things that we want. When you speak on maritime and you get cargo movement, let's start just with cargo, because we've got different types of movement from the maritime perspective, just on cargo itself. It's something that we need to start with to enable after to happen. Okay, I don't see any questions. I'm just trying to check on LinkedIn if there are any other questions. Chan, I think there's an issue of technology, to say that we need technology, and it requires some partnership between government and corporates working together. And that with private sectors having the resources, they can really make sure that they support the technological innovative approaches, because anyway, AfCFTA allows us to be more innovative in terms of the solutions as well. So I think this is a valid approach in terms of technology, to say that that public-private conversation that we're talking about, we really need more of it in Africa. Okay, so I'm going to park it here. Like I said, we can go on for the whole day. Cham, thank you so much. Firstly, let me thank everyone that has joined in on Facebook, on LinkedIn, as well on Zoom. Thank you for joining us for this conversation. Again, my name is Lebo Letswalo. I represent the organization SingPoint and African Women in Supply Chain Association. Thank you for joining us on one of our coaching circles. As you are aware, we run our coaching circles on a monthly basis, and it's all around Africa. It's around supply chains. How do we ensure that we grow our economies through supply chains? And after being part of it, it's an interesting conversation that touches all our hearts, and really around integrating our economics and making sure that we do not remain fragmented from the African perspective. So the question is, what are you doing? What are you doing out there? Are you playing your part? Are you contributing your skills? Are you seeing a potential of growing your business outside your specific comfort zone? How are you going to ensure that as a youth out there, you participate in AfCFTA? As a woman out there, we have a voice and we are supported. How are you going to make sure that you become part and parcel of this new regime that we are living in and growing Africa? The question that we will be raising and really addressing in the next one, we are talking about how we kickstarting what AfCFTA really is. The next conversation with Sham will be now, what next? What are we supposed to be doing? Thank you so much for joining us for this conversation. Please follow us on LinkedIn, on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter. We run a lot of coaching circles on a weekly basis, by the way. So let's continue engaging. Any questions, please, we have shared our email, or you can send us a note on LinkedIn or on our inboxes. Looking forward to further engaging with yourself. Have yourself a great day. And thank you again, Sham, for making time to engage with us whilst you are traveling. There has been a worthwhile conversation, and looking forward to the next one. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, my dear sister. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye to the participants.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.